The fire raging through the fourth floor of St. Michael's wasn't an accident, and the woman standing between the flames and the hostages wasn't just a nurse. For years, the staff mocked Rowan Cale as the invisible woman who just changed bedsheets and avoided eye contact. They thought she was broken. They thought she was weak. They were wrong. When a desperate gunman locked down the ward during the blizzard of the century, he thought he was the hunter. He didn't know he had just locked himself in a cage with a Delta Force ghost. The wind off Lake Michigan didn't just blow, it screamed. It was a living, malevolent thing, tearing through the concrete canyons of Chicago with a violence that rattled the bones of the city. They called it the Hawk, but tonight it felt more like a Leviathan. Snow fell in sheets so thick they erased the skyline, turning the world outside the glass walls of St. Michael's Hospital into a churning void of white. The temperature had plummeted to 20 below zero, a cold that froze breath in the lungs and turned the streets into treacherous sheets of black ice. Inside the emergency room, however, the air was warm, smelling of rubbing alcohol, floor wax, and the stale coffee that fueled the graveyard shift. Rowan Cale stood near the nurse's station, her body almost perfectly still. She was a woman who seemed designed to be overlooked. She was 35, though the fine lines around her eyes suggested she had lived through a century of winters. Her scrub top was a faded navy blue, clean but worn at the seams, and her dark hair was pulled back into a severe, utilitarian bun. She wore no makeup, no jewelry, and her badge hung slightly askew. To the casual observer, she was just part of the furniture, as essential and uninteresting as the IV poles or the rolling carts. But Rowan Cale noticed everything. She noticed the slight tremor in the hands of the new triage nurse. She noticed the rhythmic flickering of the overhead fluorescent light in Trauma Bay 2. She noticed that the heater near the sliding doors was struggling to keep the sub-zero draft at bay. "Crash cart! I need a crash cart in Bay 4. The shout shattered the hum of the ER. A young nursing student, barely 22, with terrified eyes and a name tag that read Chloe, spun around too fast. Her elbow caught a tray of surgical instruments, scalpels, forceps, kidney dishes, and sent them clattering to the linoleum floor with a noise like a dropped box of silverware. "Oh God, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry," Chloe stammered, dropping to her knees to scramble for the sterile tools, her face flushing a deep crimson. The double doors to the trauma bay swung open, and Dr. Julian Sterling stormed out. Julian Sterling was the kind of man who took up all the oxygen in a room. He was tall, with the perfectly coiffed hair of a television anchor, and a jawline that seemed carved from granite. He wore a crisp white coat that somehow remained spotless amidst the chaos of the ER, and a heavy gold Rolex glinted on his wrist. He was brilliant. Everyone knew that, but his brilliance was a cold, sharp thing that cut anyone who got too close. "Get up!" Sterling snapped at the girl on the floor. Chloe froze, a pair of forceps in her hand. "Dr. Sterling, I don't care what you just..." Sterling interrupted, his voice dripping with disdain. He stepped over the mess, looking down at her as if she were a stain on his shoes. "This is a hospital, not a cafeteria. If you lack the coordination to walk and carry a tray simultaneously, perhaps you should consider a career in janitorial services." The ER went silent. Patients in the waiting area looked up. Other nurses averted their eyes, terrified of drawing the surgeon's fire. Rowan moved. She didn't rush. She simply appeared. She knelt beside Chloe, her movements fluid and efficient. In seconds, she had gathered the sharp instruments into a biohazard bin and helped the shaking girl to her feet. "Go check the vitals in bed 6, Chloe," Rowan said, her voice a low, raspy alto that rarely rose above a whisper. "I've got this." Chloe fled, wiping her eyes. Rowan stood up and found herself chest to chest with Sterling. He looked at her, his lip curling slightly. "Always the mother hen, aren't you, Cale?" Sterling sneered. He checked his watch, an impatient gesture. "Cleaning up messes. It's the only thing you're actually good at." Rowan met his gaze. Her eyes were a dark, unreadable brown. There was no anger in them, only a vast, empty calm that Sterling found unsettling, though he couldn't say why. "The girl is learning, Doctor," Rowan said. "We're short-staffed. The storm has the night shift snowed out." "Excuses," Sterling scoffed. He stepped closer, invading her personal space, a power move he used on everyone. "Do you know why you're still a night nurse at your age, Cal? Why you hide in the shadows while the real medicine happens? Rowan didn't flinch. She didn't blink. She just waited. Because you have no ambition, Sterling said, loud enough for the charge nurse to hear. You're a phantom. You check boxes, you change bedsheets, and you stay out of the way. Don't presume to lecture me on staffing. Just clean the floor. He turned on his heel and marched back toward the doctor's lounge, leaving a wake of tension behind him. Rowan watched him go. She didn't sigh. She didn't roll her eyes. She simply bent down, picked up the last metal tray, and placed it on the cart. Her heart rate hadn't increased by a single beat. The wind outside howled louder, shaking the heavy glass doors. The lights overhead flickered once, twice, then steadied. Rowan moved toward the pediatric wing. The storm was getting worse. The city officials had already declared a state of emergency. The roads were impassable. The ambulances had stopped running. St. Michael's was effectively an island, cut off from the rest of the world by a sea of white. In room 404, a small lamp cast a warm yellow glow against the darkness. Leo sat up in his bed, his knees pulled to his chest. He was 8 years old, but his chronic kidney failure made him look much younger. His skin was the color of parchment, translucent and fragile, and his eyes were too big for his face, dark pools of worry that scanned the room. He clutched a worn, stuffed bear that was missing an ear. A crack of thunder shook the building, a rare winter phenomenon that sounded like artillery fire. Leo flinched, burying his face in the bear. Rowan stepped into the room. She didn't turn on the main lights. She moved to the bedside chair and sat down. "It's loud tonight," Rowan said softly. Leo peeked out from behind the bear. "Is the roof going to break?" "No," Rowan said. "This building is made of steel and concrete. It was built to handle worse things than snow." "It sounds like monsters," Leo whispered. Rowan reached out. Her hand, rough and scarred from a life she never spoke about, rested gently on Leo's thin shoulder. She didn't stroke his arm. She just held it, a firm, grounding pressure. "Monsters are just noise, Leo," she said. Leo looked at her hand, then up at her face. He took a deep breath. Rowan didn't offer him fake promises. She didn't tell him everything was going to be sunshine and rainbows. She offered him something more tangible, her own stillness. "Put your hand here." Rowan guided Leo's small, trembling hand to her own wrist. "Feel that?" Leo concentrated. Under his fingertips, he felt her pulse. It was slow, steady, rhythmic. Thump, thump, thump. It was the heartbeat of someone who was completely unafraid. "You're not scared?" Leo asked. "Not of the wind," Rowan said. "The wind passes. You just have to hold your ground until it does." The fear began to drain out of the boy. The steady beat under his fingers was an anchor. His breathing slowed to match hers. Within minutes, his eyelids grew heavy. The thunder rumbled again, but this time he didn't jump. He just squeezed Rowan's wrist and drifted into a fitful sleep. Rowan sat there for another 10 minutes, watching the snow lash against the window. She checked the monitors. His oxygen saturation was holding. His heart rate was stabilizing. She adjusted his blanket, her movements tender, in a way that contradicted her earlier stoicism. She left the room silently, stepping back into the hallway. The atmosphere in the ER had shifted. It was subtler than the storm, but Rowan felt it instantly. The air pressure seemed to drop. The chatter at the nurse's station had died down. Then, the world went black. The main power grid had failed. For 3 terrifying seconds, the hospital was plunged into absolute darkness. Then, with a mechanical groan, the backup generators kicked in. The lights sputtered back to life, but they were different now, dimmer, casting long, harsh shadows. The red emergency lights above the exits bathed the white walls in the color of dried blood. "Great," someone muttered. "Just what we needed." Rowan stood near the junction of the hallways. Her eyes adjusted instantly to the lower light levels. She scanned the corridor, habit, not choice. Exit A, clear. Exit B, blocked by a gurney. Boom. The sound didn't come from the sky. It came from the main entrance. The sliding glass doors, which had been locked against the storm, were forced open with a violent shudder. The locking mechanism snapped with a sharp crack that echoed like a gunshot. A blast of freezing air carrying snow and ice swirled into the heated waiting room, instantly creating a fog of condensation. Papers flew off the intake desk. The receptionist screamed. Through the swirling mist, a figure emerged. He was a large man, but he looked shrunken inside his clothes. He wore a heavy soaked parka that dripped water onto the floor. His face was raw from the cold, his eyes wild and bloodshot, darting around the room with the frantic energy of a trapped animal. He carried a duffel bag in his left hand, and the pungent chemical stench of gasoline wafted off him, overpowering the smell of antiseptic. But it was what was in his right hand that made the room freeze. A hunting rifle. Wooden stock, scoped, well used. He held it with a grip so tight his knuckles were white. "Nobody move!" he roared. His voice was cracked, broken by sobbing and rage. Rowan was 30 feet away, standing in the shadows of the corridor. She didn't scream. She didn't run. Her body went rigid, but not with fear. Her chin dropped slightly, protecting her throat. Her knees bent imperceptibly, shifting her weight to the balls of her feet. The tired nurse vanished. The ghost took her place. The man raised the rifle, aiming it at the ceiling, and pulled the trigger. Crack! The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. Plaster and dust rained down. Someone shrieked. A security guard reached for his belt, but the man swung the rifle toward the crowd, his finger hovering dangerously on the trigger guard. "I said nobody move!" the man screamed, tears streaming down his face, mixing with the melting snow. "I want answers. Where is he?" He took a step forward, the water squelching in his boots. "Where is Julian Sterling?" The echo of the gunshot didn't fade. It seemed to hang in the freezing air, a violent punctuation mark that stopped time itself. For a heartbeat, the emergency room was a tableau of terror. A mother covered her child's ears in the waiting area. A triage nurse froze with a phone halfway to her ear. And Dr. Julian Sterling stood by the trauma bay doors, his face drained of color, looking less like a god of medicine and more like a statue made of ash. Arthur Pree didn't look like a villain from a movie. He looked like a man who had been hollowed out from the inside, leaving only a brittle shell filled with rage. He stepped further into the light, kicking a plastic chair out of his way. The movement was clumsy, uncoordinated. "I asked a question." Arthur's voice cracked, sounding wet and ragged. "Where is he?" Rowan Cale remained in the shadows near the linen cart. Her eyes, dark and unblinking, dissected the man in front of her. She wasn't looking at his face. She was looking at his hands. They were trembling. It wasn't the steady, rhythmic shake of Parkinson's or the jitter of a junkie. It was the violent tremor of massive adrenaline dumping into the system of someone who had never held a weapon against another human being. His right index finger was jammed inside the trigger guard, resting heavily on the trigger itself. There was no discipline, no training. Rule number 1, Rowan's mind recited, a voice from a decade ago echoing in her head. Keep your finger straight and off the trigger until you intend to fire. Arthur Pree intended to fire. He just didn't know when. That made him infinitely more dangerous than a soldier. A soldier had rules of engagement. A broken man had nothing but pain. I am Dr. Sterling," Julian stammered, stepping forward. He held his hands up, palms out, the gold Rolex catching the dim emergency light. It was a gesture of surrender, but his posture was still rigid with indignation. Arthur swung the barrel of the hunting rifle toward Sterling. The motion was too fast, too wide. The barrel swept past 3 other people before settling on the doctor's chest. "You," Arthur breathed. The recognition in his eyes wasn't triumph. It was agony. "You don't remember me." "I see many patients," Sterling said, his voice gaining a fraction of its usual authority, trying to regain control of his domain. "Sir, you need to put the weapon down. We can discuss this. Whatever grievance you have..." "Grievance?" Arthur let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "You killed her. 2 years ago. Emily Pree. She was 6. She came in for a tonsillectomy. A routine procedure, you said. You said she'd be home for ice cream." Sterling blinked. The name meant nothing to him. To him, patients were charts, puzzles to be solved, and then filed away. "Sir, complications happen. If there was a malpractice issue, the hospital's legal team..." "I don't want your lawyers," Arthur roared. He reached into the duffel bag at his feet. Rowan tensed, shifting her weight to the balls of her feet, preparing to launch herself if he pulled out a bomb. But it wasn't a bomb. It was a red plastic canister. Arthur unscrewed the cap with his teeth, spitting it onto the floor. With a wide, erratic swing of his arm, he began to pour the contents over the main reception desk. The smell hit them instantly. Acrid, stinging, chemical, gasoline. The fumes rolled through the ER, overpowering the scent of antiseptic. It was a primal smell, triggering an ancestral fear in everyone present. In a sealed building, with the ventilation systems running on low power, the vapor was a choking blanket. "You burn my world down," Arthur wept, sloshing the fuel onto the linoleum, creating a slick, shimmering pool that spread toward the waiting patients. "Now, I burn yours." "Stop!" Sterling shouted, his voice pitching up in panic. "Listen to me. Is this about money? Is that it? I can write you a check. Right now, I have personal assets, 50,000, 100,000. Just tell me the number." Rowan closed her eyes for a split second. "Idiot," she thought. "You don't offer money to a man who wants his soul back." The offer hit Arthur like a physical blow. His face twisted, turning a deep, mottled purple. "You think you can buy her?" he screamed. "You think your money pays for my little girl?" He racked the bolt of the rifle. A fresh cartridge ejected, clattering onto the floor, and a new one slid into the chamber. He didn't even notice he had wasted a round. "Get over here," Arthur commanded, gesturing with the barrel. "All of you, into the waiting area, now! If anyone tries to leave, I light the match." The herd instinct took over. Patients, nurses, and orderlies stumbled toward the designated corner, huddled together like sheep in a storm. Chloe, the young intern, was sobbing quietly, clutching a clipboard to her chest as if it could stop a bullet. Rowan moved with the crowd, placing herself at the back, near a structural pillar. She made herself small, her shoulders hunched, her head down. She needed to look harmless. She needed to be invisible. Arthur paced back and forth in front of them, his boots splashing in the gasoline and melting snow. He was breathing hard, gasping for air as if he were drowning. Then he stumbled. His boots slipped on the slick mixture of fuel and water. He grabbed the edge of the reception desk to steady himself, and as he did, he left a smear of bright crimson on the white laminate. Arthur looked at his hand. It was covered in blood. Rowan had noticed the cut earlier, but the adrenaline had kept Arthur from feeling it. When he had smashed through the glass doors, a shard of plate glass must have sliced deeply into his palm. Now, the adrenaline was plateauing, and the pain was breaking through. Blood dripped from his fingers, landing in the gasoline with a soft, plip-plip sound. The rifle barrel wavered as his grip weakened. "Damn it," Arthur hissed, clutching his hand to his chest. He looked at the blood, then at the hostages. His eyes were wide, panic warring with rage. He couldn't hold the gun and the lighter if his hand was useless. He needed a medic. "You," Arthur barked, pointing the gun at the huddle of terrified staff. "I need a bandage. Who's a nurse?" 3 nurses in the front row shrank back, terrified of drawing his attention. Sterling was busy trying to hide behind a portable X-ray machine. Rowan didn't step forward. She waited. She knew how predators selected their prey. Movement attracted the eye. Stillness was camouflage. Arthur's wild gaze swept over the sobbing intern, the cowering receptionist, and the trembling doctor. Then his eyes stopped. They landed on the woman in the faded navy scrubs standing near the pillar, the one who wasn't crying, the one who wasn't looking away. Rowan stood perfectly still, her hands clasped loosely in front of her waist, a submissive posture that also happened to keep her hands ready for action. She met his gaze. She didn't glare, she didn't plead. She just watched him. For a second, the chaos of the room fell away. It was just the two of them, the hunter and the wolf disguised as a sheep. "You," Arthur said, pointing the rifle directly at her chest. "The quiet one. Get over here." The distance between the pillar and the gunman was only 20 feet, but in the tactical landscape of Rowan Cale's mind, it was a minefield. She stepped away from the safety of the concrete column, her movement deliberate and heavy, shedding the natural grace of a soldier and adopting the clumsy, hesitant gait of the overworked civilian. She let her shoulders slump forward, rounding her spine to appear smaller, less threatening. She clasped her hands together in front of her chest, wringing them nervously. a universal sign of anxiety that masked the fact she was keeping her hands within the workspace, ready to strike or defend if the situation deteriorated instantly. I can do it, Rowan stammered. Her voice was thin, pitching up an octave higher than her natural register. I can fix your hand. Arthur Pree turned the barrel of the rifle toward her. The bore looked like a black eye staring into her soul. Stop right there, Arthur barked. He wiped sweat and blood from his forehead with his sleeve, smearing a gruesome streak across his face. Don't try anything stupid. I'll drop you. I swear to God, I'll drop you. Rowan froze. She made herself tremble, vibrating her knees enough to be visible. She widened her eyes, letting the terror in the room reflect in them. Please, she whimpered, pointing a shaking finger at the floor. The blood. It's mixing with the gasoline. It's a slipping hazard. If you fall, the gun might go off. We don't want an accident. It was a banal, ridiculous thing to say in the face of a hostage situation, worrying about a dirty floor. But it was exactly the kind of bureaucratic, small-minded concern a timid night nurse would have. It was disarming because it was so pathetic. Arthur blinked, the confusion momentarily overriding his rage. He looked down at the swirling puddle of pink slush at his feet. He felt the sting in his palm, the throb that was beginning to travel up his arm. He was losing dexterity. He knew he couldn't hold the perimeter if he couldn't hold the gun. Slowly, Arthur commanded, stepping back but keeping the rifle leveled at her chest. Hands where I can see them. Rowan nodded frantically. She reached into the pocket of her scrub top. The movement was telegraphed, agonizingly slow. She pulled out a roll of gauze and a small roll of medical tape, standard items she always carried. She approached him. The smell hit her first. It wasn't just the raw chemical burn of the gasoline. It was the smell of a man who had been disintegrating for days. Stale sweat, unwashed clothes, and the metallic tang of fear. Turn around, Arthur hissed when she was within arm's reach. I can't wrap it if I can't see it, Rowan whispered, her eyes fixed on his boots. Do it from the side, and if I feel you tense up, if I feel you reach for anything else. He pressed the muzzle of the rifle against her left temple. The steel was freezing cold, a stark contrast to the humid heat of the ER. Rowan didn't flinch. She let out a shaky breath, designed to sound like a sob. Okay, please don't hurt me. She knelt beside him, avoiding the puddle of gas. She took his injured hand. It was a large hand, callous and rough, a working man's hand. The cut was deep, a jagged laceration across the thenar eminence of the thumb. It was bleeding freely, the blood hot and sticky against her cool skin. Rowan began to wrap the wound. She didn't work with her usual efficiency. Instead, she fumbled. She dropped the tape. She apologized. She rewrapped a section that was perfectly fine. Hurry up, Arthur growled, the barrel digging into her skin, bruising the temple. I'm sorry, I'm nervous, Rowan said. While her hands played the part of the incompetent nurse, her eyes were dissecting the weapon. It was a Winchester Model 70, older model, walnut stock. The bluing on the barrel was worn, but it was the mechanism that held her attention. The bolt was closed. Her eyes flicked to the safety catch located on the right side of the receiver, just behind the bolt handle. Fire selector position. Forward. Red dot visible. Red is dead. The safety was off. Her gaze traveled down to the trigger guard. Arthur's finger wasn't resting on the guard. It was curled tight around the trigger, the skin of his knuckle white from the pressure. A sneeze, a slip, a sudden noise. Any of it would send a .30-06 round through her skull or into the crowd of patients behind her. She needed to de-escalate him. She needed to lower his heart rate. You have strong hands, Rowan murmured, keeping her voice low, under the radar of the rest of the room. You work in construction? Arthur looked down at her, surprised by the question. Cabinet maker, he rasped. I built custom cabinets. Detail work, Rowan said, finally securing the tape. You have to be patient for that. For a second, the tension in Arthur's arm relaxed. The barrel moved an inch away from her head. He was remembering who he used to be before the grief ate him alive. I built Emily a dollhouse, Arthur whispered, his eyes glazing over. Victorian style, 3 stories. She never got to paint it. The connection was fragile, a thin thread of humanity that Rowan was carefully spooling out. She was about to ask him about the paint color, about the dollhouse, to pull him further away from the ledge. Then the silence was shattered. "This is absolutely preposterous." Dr. Julian Sterling stepped out from behind the X-ray machine. He couldn't stand it. He couldn't stand being a spectator in his own kingdom. He couldn't stand watching the useless nurse handling the situation while he cowered. His ego, bruised and battered, demanded he take control. "Mr. Pree," Sterling announced, his voice projecting with the arrogance of a man used to being obeyed. "I have just recalled the case. The Prey girl. Yes." Arthur stiffened. The connection Rowan had built snapped like a dry twig. The rifle barrel swung away from Rowan and pointed back at the doctor. "You remember?" Arthur asked, his voice trembling. "I remember the file," Sterling said, adjusting his white coat. "There were underlying conditions, a coagulation disorder, if I'm not mistaken. The hemorrhage was unfortunate, tragic even, but statistically unavoidable. The hospital followed all standard protocols. We are not liable for genetic bad luck." Rowan closed her eyes. "You arrogant fool." Sterling wasn't trying to comfort Arthur. He was trying to absolve himself. He was speaking legalese to a man holding a gun. "Genetic bad luck?" Arthur repeated the words, tasting the bile in them. "You didn't even come to the waiting room. You sent a resident to tell me my daughter was dead. You were at a fundraiser an hour later. I saw the photos online. You were drinking champagne while my daughter was in the morgue." "I have a life, Mr. Pree," Sterling shouted back, his fear converting into defensive anger. "I saved thousands of lives. I cannot mourn every single failure. If I did, I wouldn't be able to hold a scalpel." "Failure?" Arthur roared. "She wasn't a failure. She was my life." Arthur kicked out blindly. His heavy boot caught Rowan in the shoulder, sending her sprawling backward onto the floor. She didn't resist the fall. She rolled with it, sliding across the slick linoleum to stop near the feet of Chloe, the intern. Arthur marched toward Sterling, the rifle raised. "You want to talk about luck? Let's see how lucky you are." The atmosphere in the room compressed. The air felt electric, charged with imminent violence. Sterling backed up until he hit the wall, his hands raising feebly. "No, wait, Sterling gasped. Boom! It wasn't the gun. Outside, the storm unleashed a fury that shook the foundations of St. Michael's. A peal of thunder, closer and louder than any before, detonated directly overhead. The lights flickered and died completely for a second, before the emergency red glow surged back. In the huddle of patients, little Leo, clutching his stuffed bear, screamed. It was a high, piercing shriek of pure terror, triggered by the darkness and the noise. "Make him shut up!" Arthur spun around, the rifle swinging wildly between Sterling and the crying child. "Shut him up or I will!" Chaos erupted. Patients scrambled backward, knocking over chairs. Rowan was on the floor, crouched in a sprinter's starting position. The timid nurse mask had slipped. Her face was set in a mask of cold, hard calculation. She looked at Chloe. The young intern was hyperventilating, her eyes fixed on the gun. Rowan reached out and gripped Chloe's ankle. The grip was iron. It wasn't comforting. It was commanding. Chloe looked down, startled by the intensity. She saw Rowan's eyes. They weren't the eyes of the woman who changed bedpans. They were the eyes of a predator assessing a kill box. Rowan leaned in, her lips barely moving, her voice a hiss of compressed air that cut through the screaming and the thunder. "Listen to me," Rowan commanded, the tone stripping away any possibility of disobedience. "Stay low. Watch my hand. When I move, you take the boy and you get to the stairwell. You do not look back. You run." Chloe blinked, stunned. "Rowan?" "Get ready," Rowan whispered, her gaze locking back onto Arthur's exposed back. "The wolf is distracted. The distance between life and death is often measured in inches, in seconds, or in the twitch of a muscle. For Dr. Julian Sterling, pressed against the beige wall of the trauma bay, that distance had shrunk to the length of a rifle barrel. Arthur Pree's finger tightened on the trigger. His breathing was a jagged rhythm of sobs and snarls. His eyes locked on the doctor, who represented everything he had lost. The air in the ER was thick with the fumes of gasoline and the electric charge of imminent murder. Rowan Cale knew the signs. She saw the shift in Arthur's shoulders, the way his jaw set. He had stopped talking. He had stopped negotiating. He was crossing the threshold from threat to execution. She had to break the tunnel vision. Rowan was still on the floor where Arthur had kicked her, near the metal cart laden with supplies that Chloe had dropped earlier. To the untrained eye, she looked like a woman scrambling away in terror, but every movement was calculated. Her right foot found the base of a heavy IV pole. Her left hand hovered near the debris scattered on the linoleum. "No!" Rowan screamed, a sound of pure, frantic panic. She lunged forward, not at Arthur, but into the space between them. She kicked the IV pole, sending it crashing into a stainless steel instrument tray. Clang! The sound was hideous, a sharp, discordant cacophony of metal on metal that pierced through the tension like a physical blow. It was the auditory equivalent of a slap in the face. Arthur flinched violently. The rifle barrel jerked away from Sterling's chest, swinging instinctively toward the source of the noise. "What are you doing?" Arthur roared, his focus shattered. In that singular moment of distraction, 2 seconds, maybe 3, Rowan didn't retreat. She moved with the fluid dexterity of a magician. As she appeared to tumble amidst the fallen equipment, her hand snaked out. Her fingers closed around a pair of curved Kelly forceps, a 7-inch locking hemostat made of surgical steel. It wasn't a knife. It wasn't a gun. But in the hands of a woman who knew human anatomy as a map of vulnerabilities, it was a tool of dismantlement. With a seamless motion, she slid the steel clamp up the sleeve of her scrub top, securing it against the inside of her wrist. "I tripped! I'm sorry!" Rowan wailed, scrambling to her knees. She kept her head down, offering a posture of absolute submission. "I just wanted to get away." Arthur took a step toward her, the rifle lowering slightly. He was confused, his adrenaline spiking and crashing in disorienting waves. "Stay down! I told you to stay down!" Rowan rose slowly. She didn't stand up like a soldier. She stood up like a nurse. Her hands were raised, palms open, showing him she held nothing. The hemostat was invisible, cold against her forearm. But as she straightened her spine, something changed. She lifted her chin. The terror that had contorted her face smoothed away, replaced not by aggression, but by a profound, sorrowful stillness. She looked past the gun. She looked past the blood on his hands. She looked directly into Arthur's wet, red-rimmed eyes. It was the look a mother gives a child who has broken something precious, not anger, but a deep, understanding disappointment. "Arthur," she said. Her voice wasn't the high-pitched whimper she had used before. It was her real voice, low, resonant, and undeniably calm. It cut through the weeping of the patients and the howling of the wind outside. Arthur blinked, unsettled by the shift. "Shut up. Don't say my name." "Emily," Rowan said softly. The name hung in the air. Arthur froze. The rifle trembled in his hands. Rowan took a half-step forward. It was a violation of every safety protocol, invading the personal space of an armed assailant. But she needed to bridge the gap. She needed to turn him from a gunman back into a father. "You said you built her a dollhouse," Rowan continued, her eyes locking onto his. "Victorian style. That takes a lot of time, Arthur. A lot of love." "She never saw it finished," Arthur choked out, the rage warring with the grief in his throat. "He killed her before I could finish the roof." "I know," Rowan said. She didn't deny it. She didn't defend the doctor. She validated the pain. "That hole in your chest? It feels like it's going to swallow you whole, doesn't it?" Arthur's lip quivered. The rifle lowered another inch. He was listening. The monster was receding, and the man was surfacing. "Tell me," Rowan asked, her voice dropping to a whisper that drew him in. "What color was she going to paint it? Did she have a favorite color?" The question was a psychological flashbang. It bypassed his logic, bypassed his anger, and went straight to the memory center of his brain. Arthur wasn't in a frozen ER in Chicago anymore. He was back in his garage, smelling sawdust, hearing a little girl's laughter. "Purple," Arthur whispered, his eyes unfocusing, tears spilling over his cheeks. She wanted lavender, with white trim. "Lavender," Rowan repeated gently. "That's a beautiful choice. It's the color of calm." The tension in the room dissipated. replaced by a heavy, tragic sorrow. The gun barrel pointed at the floor. Arthur's shoulders slumped. He looked broken, defeated by the memory of the purple paint he never bought. Rowan prepared to move. She was 3 feet away. She could reach the barrel. She could end this without a shot fired. Then the spell broke. Dr. Julian Sterling, seeing the gun lower and the gunman distracted by tears, saw his window. He didn't see the delicate psychological web Rowan had spun. He only saw an exit. "Now!" Sterling hissed to himself. He bolted. He pushed off the wall, scrambling toward the double doors leading to the main hospital corridor. But in his panic, he forgot the chaos Arthur had created. His expensive Italian leather loafers hit the slick mixture of gasoline and melting snow near the reception desk. Screech! His feet went out from under him. Sterling went down hard, his body slamming into a metal waste bin with a deafening crash. The noise acted like a starter pistol. Arthur snapped back to reality. The memory of Emily vanished. The garage disappeared. He was back in the trap, and the enemy was escaping. "No!" Arthur screamed. Panic, primal and blind, seized him. He didn't aim. He just reacted. He swung the rifle toward the noise of the falling doctor. Rowan lunged, abandoning all pretense. "Arthur, don't!" Her hand slapped against the barrel of the rifle, shoving it upward just as his finger convulsed on the trigger. Boom! The muzzle flash blinded them all for a microsecond. The sound was louder than the thunder, a concussive slap that rang in their ears. The bullet missed Julian Sterling by inches. It screamed over his head and slammed into the large gray utility panel on the far wall, the master control for the floor's electrical subsystems. Sparks showered down like a cascade of angry fireflies. There was a loud, buzzing zzz pop, followed by the smell of ozone and frying circuitry. Then, the red emergency lights died. The hum of the backup ventilation cut out. The monitors beeping in the trauma bays went silent. The entire 4th floor of St. Michael's Hospital plunged into a darkness so absolute it felt physical. For a moment, there was no sound but the ringing in their ears and the terrified gasping of breath. The storm outside seemed to roar in triumph, sensing that the last fortress of warmth and light had finally fallen. Rowan stood in the pitch black, less than 2 feet from a man who had just tried to kill. She could hear his ragged breathing. She could smell the gunpowder mixed with the gasoline. She reached into her sleeve, her fingers wrapped around the cold steel loops of the hemostat. The time for talking was over. The time for the ghost had begun. The darkness was absolute. It was not merely the absence of light. It was a physical weight that pressed against the eyes, heavy and suffocating. The air, already thick with the fumes of gasoline, now carried the sharp, metallic tang of ozone from the fried electrical panel and the sulfurous bite of gunpowder. For the patients huddled in the waiting area, the darkness was a shroud of terror. For Dr. Julian Sterling, lying bruised on the floor, it was a coffin. But for Rowan Cale, the darkness was a homecoming. In the nanosecond after the lights died, the ER ceased to be a place of healing. It became a battle space. Rowan didn't freeze. While Arthur Pree was blinking, his retinas still burned by the muzzle flash of his own weapon, Rowan was moving. She knew the layout of the emergency room down to the inch. She knew that 3 steps to her left was the trauma bay supply closet. She knew that Dr. Sterling was sprawled 2 feet in front of her. She reached out, her hand finding the collar of Sterling's expensive lab coat. She didn't whisper. She didn't ask. She yanked him backward with a strength that belied her slender frame. "Move," she breathed, the sound barely audible over the ringing in their ears. Sterling scrambled backward, his heels skidding on the linoleum, guided by her iron grip. Rowan shoved him into the supply closet, a narrow space filled with sterile saline bags and linen. "Stay here," she commanded, her lips close to his ear. "If you make a sound, you die. If you open this door before I say clear, you die." "Cale," Sterling gasped, trembling violently. "He has a gun. We need to—" "Quiet." She closed the door, leaving it cracked open a fraction of an inch, just enough so the latch wouldn't click. She was alone in the corridor now. 30 feet away, Arthur Pree was screaming. "I can hear you!" Arthur roared into the blackness. "Turn the lights on. Turn them on, or I start shooting." Boom. A muzzle flash illuminated the room like a strobe light. freezing the scene in a horrific monochromatic flash. Arthur was spinning in a circle, firing blindly. The bullet smashed into a vending machine, shattering the glass front and sending soda cans exploding outward. Rowan was already gone from her previous position. She moved in a crouch, her footsteps silent. She wasn't wearing tactical boots. She was wearing soft-soled nursing shoes, designed for 12-hour shifts on hard floors. In this environment, they were ninja tabi. She needed to disorient him. The OODA loop: observe, orient, decide, act. Arthur was stuck in act, firing wildly. She needed to break his orientation. Rowan felt her way along the counter of the nurse's station. Her hand brushed against a plastic bottle. Isopropyl alcohol, 500 milliliters. She weighed it in her hand. She waited for Arthur's heavy, erratic breathing to hitch. She threw the bottle, not at him, but high and hard toward the far wall, near the pediatric wing entrance, 20 feet to his right. Crack splash. The bottle hit the wall and burst. Arthur spun toward the sound. There you are! Boom! Boom! 2 shots ripped into the drywall where the bottle had hit. The muzzle flashes revealed his position clearly. He was standing near the center of the room, ankle-deep in the gasoline puddle he had created, the rifle shouldered awkwardly. Rowan moved during the thunder of the shots. She closed the distance. She was 10 feet away. 8. She needed another distraction. She grabbed a metal kidney dish from the counter. She slid it across the floor in the opposite direction, toward the elevators. Scritch clang. Arthur whipped his head around, panic seizing him. The darkness was alive. The ghosts of his grief were coming for him. Stop it, he screamed, racking the bolt of the Winchester. Clack slide. The spent casing ejected. Clack home. A fresh round loaded. Show yourself! Rowan was now 5 feet away, pressed against the side of a heavy mobile computer cart. She could smell him, the sweat, the fear, the unwashed desperation. She took a breath, centering herself. The pain in her shoulder where he had kicked her earlier was a dull throb, easily ignored. Pain was just information. She waited for him to move. Arthur took a step forward, sweeping the rifle barrel left and right. He passed the computer cart. The barrel of the rifle poked past the edge of her cover. Rowan exploded from the darkness. She didn't go for his throat. She went for the weapon. Her left hand shot out, grabbing the hot barrel of the rifle and shoving it upward. Arthur shouted in surprise, his finger jerking on the trigger. Boom! The round went into the ceiling, blowing out a tile and showering them in gypsum dust. Arthur tried to rack the bolt again, to clear the chamber and load another round. He yanked the bolt handle back. Clack! The action opened. This was the moment. As Arthur tried to shove the bolt forward to chamber the next round, Rowan drove her right hand forward. She wasn't holding a knife. She was holding the Kelly forceps, the hemostat she had hidden in her sleeve. She jammed the steel instrument directly into the open ejection port, driving it deep into the receiver, right between the bolt face and the chamber wall. No! Arthur grunted, trying to slam the bolt closed. He couldn't. The surgical steel was wedged tight. The bolt slammed into the forceps, jamming halfway. The rifle was now mechanically dead. It was nothing more than a 10-pound club. Rowan didn't stop. She used his momentum against him. She released the barrel and slammed her palm into his chest, creating space. "It's over, Arthur," she said, her voice echoing with authority in the dark. "The gun is dead. Put it down." Arthur pulled the trigger. Nothing happened. He yanked on the bolt. It was frozen solid, the metal forceps biting into the mechanism. "You," Arthur wheezed, backing away. "You broke it." "I saved you from becoming a murderer," Rowan said, stepping toward him, her hands up, ready to grapple. "It doesn't have to end like this." Arthur looked at the useless rifle in his hands. Then he looked at Rowan, who was barely visible as a silhouette against the faint ambient light from the street lamps outside the shattered doors. A sob ripped out of his throat. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated heartbreak. "It's already ended," Arthur whispered. "It ended when she died." He dropped the rifle. It clattered to the floor with a heavy thud, splashing into the gasoline. Rowan let out a breath. "Good. Now, come with me. We can—" "No," Arthur said. His voice changed. The rage was gone, replaced by a terrifying, hollow calm. "I told you, I want justice, or I want silence." He reached into his pocket. Rowan saw the spark before she saw the object. It was the flint wheel of a Zippo lighter. "Arthur, don't!" Rowan screamed, launching herself at him, but she was too far away, and Arthur wasn't aiming for her. He wasn't even aiming for the floor. He reached into his other pocket and pulled out a road flare, a bright red stick of magnesium and sulfur. He struck the ignition cap. Hiss! The flare roared to life, a blinding, brilliant red sun bursting into existence in the center of the dark ER. The light was searing, casting long, dancing shadows that looked like demons on the walls. "If I don't get justice," Arthur wept, looking at the sputtering red flame in his hand, "then we all burn together." He didn't throw it, he simply dropped it. The flare hit the puddle of gasoline and melting snow. There was no explosion, just a sickening, rapid whoosh as the vapors ignited. The floor transformed instantly. A wave of orange and blue fire raced across the linoleum, faster than a man could run. It consumed the reception desk. It raced up the curtains of the trauma bays. It licked at the ceiling tiles. The heat was instantaneous and crushing. The fire alarm finally triggered. A shrill, deafening klaxon that added to the nightmare. Whoop, whoop, whoop. "Fire! Move! Move!" Rowan screamed, shielding her face from the sudden inferno. She looked toward the main exit. It was gone. A wall of fire, 10 feet high, now separated the patients and staff from the sliding glass doors. The gasoline had spread wide, cutting off the primary escape route. Arthur stood in the middle of the flames, the fire reflecting in his weeping eyes. He didn't move. He welcomed it. Rowan looked back at the closet where she had stashed Sterling. She looked at the huddled patients in the waiting area, screaming as the smoke began to curl toward the ceiling. The tactical situation had changed. The enemy was no longer a man with a gun. The enemy was the building itself, and it was trying to eat them alive. The world had turned orange. It wasn't the warm, inviting orange of a hearth, but the violent, searing orange of destruction. The fire didn't just burn, it consumed. It ate the oxygen in the room, replacing it with a thick, oily smoke that tasted of melting plastic and burning linoleum. The roar was deafening, a continuous guttural bellow that drowned out the shrill scream of the fire alarm. Rowan Cale coughed, the smoke searing her throat. She was crouched low, near the floor where the air was marginally cleaner, but the heat was already blistering. Her eyes were streaming, stinging from the chemical fumes of the burning accelerant. Through the haze, she saw him. Arthur Pree wasn't running from the inferno he had created. He was walking deeper into it. He moved with the staggered, heavy gait of a golem, carrying a red plastic jerry can, the reserve fuel he hadn't poured yet. He wasn't heading for the exit. He was heading for the door marked compressed gas storage. Rowan's heart hammered against her ribs, harder than it had when the gun was pointed at her face. Behind that door were 20 steel cylinders of pressurized oxygen and nitrous oxide. If the fire breached that room, if the heat compromised the integrity of those tanks, the explosion wouldn't just gut the 4th floor. It would shatter the structural columns of the building. St. Michael's would collapse like a house of cards. "Arthur!" Rowan screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the roar of the flames. She pushed herself up. Her legs felt heavy, her body battered, but the calculation had been made. Intercept, neutralize. She sprinted. She hit him just as his hand reached for the door handle of the storage room. She didn't have the leverage for a clean takedown, so she used her body weight as a battering ram, slamming her shoulder into his kidneys. They went down together, a tangle of limbs crashing onto the wet, hot floor. The jerry can flew from Arthur's grip, skidding across the tiles and spinning into the base of the nurse's station, where the flames were already licking at the countertops. "Let me do it!" Arthur roared, thrashing wildly. He wasn't fighting Rowan, he was fighting for his right to die. "Let it burn!" He was big, fueled by the hysterical strength of the suicidal. He rolled over, throwing Rowan off him as if she were a doll. She scrambled backward, trying to regain her footing on the slick floor, but Arthur was faster. He lunged, his heavy hands finding her throat. He slammed her head back against the floor. Stars exploded in Rowan's vision. "It hurts!" Arthur screamed, his face inches from hers, distorted by grief and madness. Tears boiled on his cheeks. It hurts too much. I just want it to stop. He squeezed. Rowan clawed at his wrists, her thumbs digging into his tendons, trying to break his grip. But the angle was wrong. Her oxygen was cut off. The orange world began to fade into a gray tunnel. Her lungs burned, screaming for air that wasn't there. She tried to buck her hips, to sweep his legs, but he was too heavy, his weight pinning her chest. She was going to die here, not in a desert thousands of miles away, but on the floor of her own hospital, strangled by a broken father. Darkness closing in. From the supply closet 5 yards away, a sliver of darkness opened. Dr. Julian Sterling watched through the crack in the door. He was trembling so hard his teeth chattered. His instinct, the survival instinct that had served him well his entire life, screamed at him to stay hidden. Stay in the box. Wait for the firemen. You are important. You are a surgeon. You matter. He saw Rowan's hand flailing weakly, slapping the floor. He saw the life draining out of her eyes. He remembered the way she had looked at him earlier, not with contempt, like he deserved, but with command. Move. She had dragged him to safety when she could have left him exposed. She was fighting a monster with her bare hands while he hid among the saline bags. You can't save every failure, he had told Arthur. But you can save this one, a voice inside him whispered. Sterling kicked the door open. He didn't have a weapon. He didn't have a plan. He grabbed the only thing within reach, a heavy red ABC dry chemical fire extinguisher mounted on the wall inside the closet. He ripped it off the bracket. It weighed 20 pounds, dead weight in his manicured hands. "Hey!" Sterling screamed. It was a pathetic cracking sound. He ran. He didn't run like an athlete. He ran like a panicked civilian, stumbling, almost dropping the cylinder. Arthur didn't even look up. He was focused entirely on crushing Rowan's windpipe. Sterling reached them. He didn't know how to fight. He didn't know how to throw a punch. So he did the only thing that made sense. He pulled the safety pin on the extinguisher, aimed the black nozzle directly at Arthur's face, and squeezed the handle. Poosh! A blast of monoammonium phosphate powder erupted at point-blank range. The cloud was thick, yellow, and freezing cold. It hit Arthur like a physical punch, filling his eyes, his nose, and his open mouth with choking chemical dust. Arthur gagged, blinded instantly. He roared in confusion, releasing his grip on Rowan's throat to claw at his burning eyes. "Get off her!" Sterling yelled, swinging the heavy metal canister like a club. He struck Arthur on the shoulder, a clumsy, glancing blow, but enough to knock the large man off balance. Rowan sucked in a jagged, painful breath. The air tasted of chemical powder and smoke, but it was oxygen. Her brain rebooted instantly. Target compromised. Execute. She rolled onto her knees, staying low. As Arthur flailed, trying to wipe the powder from his eyes, Rowan moved behind him. She didn't hesitate. She rose, wrapping her left arm around his neck, locking her elbow under his chin. Her right hand grabbed her left bicep, and her right hand smoothed behind his head, pushing forward. The rear naked choke. Arthur thrashed, bucking backward, trying to slam her into the wall. Rowan held on. She wrapped her legs around his waist, locking her ankles, sinking her weight to drag him down. She wasn't choking his windpipe. She was compressing the carotid arteries, cutting off blood flow to the brain. "Sleep," Rowan rasped, her voice a broken whisper near his ear. "Just sleep, Arthur. No more pain." Arthur's struggles grew weaker. His hands pawed at her arms, then dropped to his sides. The fight drained out of him, replaced by the inevitable physiology of unconsciousness. 10 seconds. 12 seconds. He went limp. Rowan released the hold, letting him slide gently to the floor. She collapsed next to him, gasping, her chest heaving. Above them, a section of the suspended ceiling groaned. The heat had melted the grid. Crash! A burning tile fell, shattering on the floor inches from Sterling's feet. The fire was moving faster now, eager to consume the rest of the ward. The heat was unbearable, radiating off the walls like an oven. Rowan forced herself to stand. Her legs shook. Her throat felt like it was filled with glass shards. She looked at Sterling. The doctor was covered in yellow extinguisher powder and soot. He was staring at his own hands, holding the empty extinguisher, looking terrified and exhilarated at the same time. Is he dead?" Sterling asked, his voice shaking. "No, unconscious," Rowan croaked. She grabbed Arthur's trench coat collar. "Help me, we have to move him." Sterling blinked. "What? Leave him. He tried to kill us. He set the fire." "He's a patient now, Julian," Rowan snapped, using his first name for the first time. The authority in her voice brooked no argument. "Grab his feet." Sterling hesitated, looking at the burning wall of fire separating them from the main lobby. Then he looked at Rowan's bruised, soot-streaked face. He dropped the extinguisher and grabbed Arthur's heavy boots. They dragged the unconscious man down the short hallway toward the staff stairwell, the secondary exit that bypassed the burning reception area. The air here was slightly better, but smoke was billowing under the door. Rowan kicked the crash bar of the stairwell door. It flew open, revealing the concrete sanctuary of the stairs. Cool air rushed up to meet them. "Chloe!" Rowan shouted down the stairwell. "I'm here!" Chloe's voice echoed from the landing below. "I have the patients. We're at the 3rd floor." "Take him!" Rowan grunted, shoving Arthur's body halfway onto the landing. Sterling dragged him the rest of the way, collapsing against the concrete wall, coughing violently. "We have to go!" Sterling wheezed, grabbing Rowan's arm. "The ceiling is coming down!" Rowan stood in the doorway, framed by the smoke and the orange glow of the dying floor. She didn't step onto the landing. She looked back into the inferno. "Where is Leo?" she asked. Sterling froze. He looked down the stairs at the group of patients Chloe was herding. He saw the elderly hip fracture, the appendix case, the terrified mother. He didn't see the boy with the bear. He must be with Chloe," Sterling lied, desperate to get her to move. "No," Rowan said, her voice hollow. "He hides. When he's scared, he hides." She looked toward the pediatric wing. The fire had not reached it yet, but the smoke was thick, banking down from the ceiling like a black fog. The path was becoming a tunnel of fire. "Rowan, you can't go back in there," Sterling shouted, reaching for her. "It's a blast furnace. The oxygen room could go any second." Rowan pulled her arm away. She looked at Sterling, and for a fleeting second, a ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Take them down, Doctor," she said. "That's an order." "Rowan?" She didn't answer. She turned her back on safety. She took a breath of the cool stairwell air, held it, and plunged back into the smoke. The heat hit her instantly, hotter than before. The visibility was zero. She dropped to her hands and knees, crawling under the thermal layer. The floor was wet, hot, and covered in broken glass. "Leo!" she screamed into the roar. "Leo!" There was no answer, only the sound of the building groaning as it began to die. The corridor leading to the pediatric wing was no longer a hallway. It was the throat of a dragon. The heat was a physical weight, pressing down with enough force to crack the drywall and melt the plastic handrails. Rowan Cale moved on her belly. The air temperature at floor level was over 150 degrees, blistering the skin on her neck. But standing up meant inhaling superheated gas that would sear her lungs instantly. She dragged herself forward, inch by painful inch, her vision reduced to a gray tunnel of swirling particulate matter. "Leo!" she screamed, though it came out as a raspy croak. She reached the door of room 404. The wood was smoking, the paint bubbling into black blisters. She kicked it open, staying low. Inside, the room was a convection oven. The blackout curtains were aflame, casting a hellish dancing light on the walls. The bed was empty. The sheets were untouched. Panic, cold and sharp, tried to spike in Rowan's chest. "He's not here." Then she remembered. "He hides." She crawled toward the bathroom. The door was shut. She reached up, the brass handle searing her palm, and twisted. It was locked. "Leo! It's Rowan! Open the door!" No answer. Rowan didn't wait. She shifted her weight to her hip and drove her heel into the door just below the handle. The cheap hollow core wood splintered. She kicked again. The door swung inward. Inside the small tiled bathroom, the air was slightly cooler but thick with smoke. In the bathtub, huddled under a pile of soaking wet towels, was a small lump. Rowan pulled the towels back. Leo was curled into a ball, clutching his one-eared bear. His eyes were closed, his skin pale and clammy. He was taking shallow, gasping breaths. "Leo," Rowan whispered, checking his pulse. It was thready, carbon monoxide. He was fading. She scooped him up. He was terrifyingly light, a fragile bird in her arms. "I've got you. Wake up, Leo. We're leaving." Leo's eyes fluttered open. They were glassy, unfocused. "Rowan?" he slurred. "Is the monster here?" "Yes," Rowan said, her voice grim. "But I'm the bigger monster." She turned back to the bedroom. A wall of heat slammed into her. The hallway ceiling outside had finally given way. A mountain of burning debris blocked the door, sealing them inside room 404. The fire was now eating the doorframe, spilling into the room like a liquid. They were trapped. Rowan spun toward the window. It was a large single pane of reinforced glass. Safety glass designed to prevent patients from falling or jumping. It didn't open. She laid Leo on the floor near the window, keeping him below the smoke line. She scanned the room. She needed a battering ram. Her eyes landed on the oxygen tank standing in the corner, a heavy steel cylinder on a wheeled cart. She grabbed the tank, ripping it from its stand. It weighed 40 pounds. She swung it like a sledgehammer. Thud. The glass spiderwebbed, but didn't break. "Come on!" Rowan screamed, adrenaline flooding her exhausted muscles. She swung again, and again. On the third strike, the structural integrity failed. Crash. The window exploded outward. The reaction was instantaneous. The storm outside, the hawk, rushed in. The wind, howling at 60 miles per hour, didn't just bring fresh air, it brought oxygen. The fire at the door roared in delight, surging forward, sucking the air across the room to feed itself. A backdraft in slow motion. Rowan grabbed Leo and pulled him onto the window ledge. The wind whipped her hair across her face, stinging her eyes with ice pellets. She looked down. 4 stories. 50 feet of emptiness. Below, the world was a blur of white snow and flashing red lights. "Up here!" Rowan yelled, waving her arm. Below, the ladder truck, ladder 54, was already extended. A firefighter in a bucket was fighting a losing battle against the gale. The hydraulic arm was fully extended, straining against the wind load. The bucket was swaying violently, dipping and rising like a ship in a hurricane. The firefighter, a bulky figure in yellow turnout gear, was shouting into his radio, gesturing frantically. He tried to maneuver the bucket closer, but the wind pushed the heavy machinery back. He was 10 feet away. 3 meters of howling void separated the window ledge from safety. "I can't get closer!" The firefighter's voice was barely audible over the wind. "The stabilizers are maxed out! You have to jump!" Rowan looked at the gap. 10 feet. On a track, she could clear that easily. Standing on a slippery, ice-coated window ledge, holding an unconscious child, with a 50-foot drop onto concrete, it was suicide. But behind her, the room was disappearing. The fire had consumed the bed. The heat was searing the back of her scrubs. She needed a tether. She looked at the wall near the door. There was no fire hose cabinet inside the room. She cursed. Her eyes darted around the burning room. Think. Improvisation is the weapon of the survivor. Her eyes landed on the fire hose cabinet outside in the hallway, visible through the burning debris of the door. The hose reel had unspooled when the ceiling collapsed, and a length of the heavy, canvas-jacketed hose had snaked into the room before the debris pinned it. It was a long shot. The hose was pinned under burning rubble. It might be compromised. It might burn through. Rowan didn't have a choice. She grabbed the brass nozzle of the hose lying on the floor. She gave it a hard tug. It held. The rubble acted as an anchor. "Leo," Rowan said, pulling the boy to his feet. "We're going to fly." "I'm scared," Leo wept, the cold wind waking him up to the terror of their position. "Look at me." Rowan grabbed his face. Her eyes were fierce, burning brighter than the fire behind them. "I will not let you fall. Do you understand? I have you." She worked with lightning speed. She looped the heavy fire hose around her waist, tying a hasty but secure bowline knot. There wasn't enough time to make a harness for Leo. She unzipped her heavy scrub jacket. "Arms around my neck, legs around my waist. Squeeze as hard as you can. Do not let go." Leo buried his face in her neck, clinging to her like a baby koala. Rowan zipped the jacket up as far as it would go, cocooning him against her chest. She wrapped her arms around him, locking her fingers together. She was now tethered to the burning building. If the hose held, she could swing. If it snapped, they were dead. If the anchor point gave way, they were dead. She stepped out onto the ledge. The wind tried to push her off. The cold was shocking after the heat of the room. "Heads up!" Rowan screamed at the firefighter. The firefighter, Lieutenant Miller, saw her plan. He braced himself against the railing of the bucket, extending his arms. "I'm ready! Send it!" Rowan looked at the bucket. It swayed left, then right. She had to time the pendulum. Left, right, left. Now! Rowan didn't just step off. She drove her legs into the wall, pushing off with every ounce of explosive power she had left in her battered body. She launched into the white void. For a second, she was weightless. The wind roared in her ears. The snow blinded her. She felt the heavy canvas hose snap taut behind her. "Please hold." The hose held. It caught her momentum, transforming her fall into a swing. She arced through the air, a human pendulum swinging across the gap. She hit the metal railing of the bucket hard. Clang! The impact knocked the wind out of her. Her ribs screamed in agony. But she didn't let go of Leo. Lieutenant Miller lunged forward. He grabbed the back of Rowan's jacket, anchoring her. "I got you!" Miller yelled. "Pass the kid!" Rowan unlocked her hands. "Take him! Take him now!" Miller reached in, grabbing Leo by the back of his pajamas and hauling him over the railing into the safety of the bucket. "I have the child!" Miller shouted. "Give me your hand!" Rowan reached out. Her fingers brushed Miller's glove. At that moment, the laws of physics collected their debt. The fire hose, which had been under extreme tension, reacted to the sudden loss of weight when Leo was removed. Simultaneously, the burning debris inside room 404 shifted. The sharp, jagged edge of the metal door frame, heated to glowing red, finally sliced through the taut canvas fibers. Snap! The hose parted with a sound like a whip crack. Rowan was reaching for Miller, her body leaning out over the rail. The sudden release of tension from behind jerked her violently backward. "No!" Miller screamed, his hand clutching at empty air. Rowan fell. She didn't scream. She fell silently, her eyes locking onto Miller and Leo as they receded upwards. She saw Leo's face pressed against the grate of the bucket, his mouth open in a silent wail. "I saved him," she thought. Mission accomplished. She fell past the third floor. The second floor. She didn't hit the concrete pavement. St. Michael's Hospital had an architectural feature from the 1920s, a wide, heavy copper awning over the ambulance bay entrance on the second floor. Rowan hit the awning. It wasn't a soft landing. She hit the sloped metal with a bone-jarring crunch that echoed through the courtyard. Her body tumbled down the slope of the metal roof, unable to find purchase on the ice. She slid off the edge of the awning. She fell the remaining 15 feet to the ground. But the blizzard, the hawk that had tried to kill the city, offered one final mercy. The snowdrift below the awning was 5 feet deep, a massive soft pile of powder that had accumulated against the building's leeward side. Rowan landed in the snow. She sank deep into the white powder. There was a dull thud, and then stillness. The fire raged above. The sirens wailed, but down in the snow, it was quiet. A collective gasp went up from the crowd of police, paramedics, and evacuated staff watching from the perimeter. "Man down!" Miller screamed into his radio from the bucket. "The nurse is down. Get to her. Go! Go! Go!" Dr. Julian Sterling, who had just exited the stairwell with the other patients, saw the fall. He saw the dark shape hit the snow and not move. He broke the police line. He didn't care about the cold. He didn't care about his shoes. He ran toward the snowdrift, shouting her name. "Rowan!" But the snow didn't move. The ghost of St. Michael's lay buried in the white, as still as the grave. The first thing Rowan Cale noticed was the silence. For years, silence had been a predator, a void waiting to be filled with gunfire, screams, or the howling wind of a Chicago blizzard. But this silence was different. It was soft. It smelled of lavender laundry detergent and fresh rain. She tried to move, but her body rebelled. A dull, heavy ache radiated from her ribs, and her right leg was encased in a rigid cast suspended in a sling. Her shoulder, the one she had dislocated, was immobilized. She opened her eyes. The light was gentle, filtered through partially closed blinds. She wasn't in the ER. She was in a private room in the ICU, the kind reserved for VIPs or difficult cases. "Welcome back to the land of the living." The voice came from the corner. Dr. Julian Sterling was sitting in a visitor's chair. He wasn't wearing his white coat. He wore a rumpled gray sweater and jeans, looking like a man who hadn't slept in a week but had finally found peace with his insomnia. Rowan tried to speak, but her throat was dry. Sterling was there instantly, holding a cup of water with a straw to her lips. His hands, usually so clinical and detached, were trembling slightly with care. "Slowly," Sterling murmured. "You've been out for 10 days, medically induced coma. We had to let the swelling in your brain subside." Rowan drank. The water was the best thing she had ever tasted. She pulled back, resting her head against the pillow. "Leo!" she rasped. The name tore at her throat, but she had to know. "Alive," Sterling said, a genuine smile breaking through his exhaustion. "Discharged yesterday. He's at home. He wanted to wait for you, but his immune system, we couldn't risk it." Rowan let out a breath she felt she had been holding since she jumped out the window. "And the others?" "Everyone made it," Sterling said. "Smoke inhalation, a few burns, some PTSD, but zero casualties, except for the 4th floor. That's a total loss." He reached down and picked up a manila folder resting on his knee. He looked at it for a long moment before meeting Rowan's eyes. The arrogance that had defined him, the sneer, the posture of a god walking among mortals, was gone. In its place was a quiet, almost reverent curiosity. "I ran your background," Sterling said softly. "When the police asked for your next of kin, there was a block on your file, Department of Defense level. It took Captain Miller 3 days to get clearance just to read your service record." Rowan looked away, staring at the IV drip. "It was a long time ago. Cultural Support Team, attached to 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta," Sterling read, the words sounding foreign in the hospital room. "Silver Star for valor in the Petch Valley. Medical discharge after sustaining spinal fractures while carrying a wounded team leader 2 miles down a mountain under mortar fire." He closed the folder and placed it gently on the bedside table. "You were a legend," Sterling whispered, "and I treated you like you were furniture." "I wanted to be furniture," Rowan said, her voice gaining a little strength. "Furniture doesn't have to make life or death decisions. Furniture doesn't have nightmares." "Well," Sterling leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "You failed at that. You're terrible at being invisible, Rowan." He reached into his bag and pulled out another file. This one was thicker, stamped with the seal of a prestigious law firm. "Arthur Pree," Sterling said. Rowan stiffened. "Is he in jail?" "He's at the State Forensic Hospital," Sterling corrected. "I hired a lawyer, the best defense attorney in Chicago. We're not pleading insanity. We're pleading diminished capacity due to extreme grief and systemic failure." Rowan looked at him, surprised. "You? But he tried to kill you. He burned down your ER." "He was broken," Sterling said, looking at his hands. "And I helped break him. I was drinking champagne while his daughter was in the morgue. You were right, Rowan. I can't save everyone, but I can save him from a cage." He looked up, his eyes wet. "I'm paying for his treatment, long-term psychiatric care. He's going to get help, not a prison cell. He cried when I told him. He asked me to tell you. He's sorry." Rowan felt a lump form in her throat. She had expected Sterling to press charges, to destroy the man who had humiliated him. Instead, he had chosen mercy. "You taught me how to save a life in the fire," Sterling said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm trying to learn how to save the rest of it." Rowan reached out with her good hand. Sterling took it. It wasn't a handshake, it was an anchor. "Thank you, Julian," she whispered. 3 days later, Rowan was cleared for discharge. The physical therapy had been brutal. Her ribs screamed every time she moved, and the crutches were a nuisance, so she had resigned herself to a wheelchair for the exit. She adjusted the blanket over her legs. She was wearing her street clothes for the first time, a simple gray hoodie and sweatpants. She felt small again, vulnerable without her scrubs. "Ready to blow this joint?" Sterling asked, standing behind the wheelchair. "Just get me to the curb," Rowan muttered. "I hate goodbyes." "About that," Sterling said. He pushed the wheelchair out of the room and down the corridor. They bypassed the service elevator and headed for the main atrium of St. Michael's, the grand glass-ceilinged lobby that connected the hospital towers. "Where are we going?" Rowan asked. "The exit is the other way." "Scenic route," Sterling lied. As they rolled into the massive sun-drenched atrium, Rowan gasped. It wasn't empty. Lined up along the walls, standing shoulder to shoulder, were the staff of St. Michael's, doctors in white coats, nurses in blue scrubs, orderlies in green, janitors in gray. There were police officers from the SWAT team. There were firefighters from Ladder 54, including Leetor Miller, who stood with his arm in a sling. But it wasn't the people that made Rowan stop breathing. It was the ceiling. Suspended from the high glass skylights, hanging on invisible fishing lines, were hundreds of paper cranes. They were everywhere, a flock of thousands floating in the air currents. They were made of everything imaginable: colored construction paper, lined notebook pages, candy wrappers, even old prescription inserts. "Leo," Rowan whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. "He started it," Sterling said, his voice soft behind her ear. "From his bed at home. He made 10. Then the nurses on the pediatric floor made 20. Then the patients joined in. Then the police. It's the legend of the 1,000 cranes, Rowan. A wish for healing." Sterling pushed her slowly through the center of the room. It was silent. There was no applause, no cheering. It was a silence deeper and more profound than the one in the ICU. As she passed, the people didn't wave. Dr. Holloway, the chief of surgery, stood tall. He placed his right hand over his heart. Chloe, the young intern who had been so terrified, stood next to him. She was crying, but her chin was up, her back straight. She placed her hand over her heart. Lindsay Miller and his firefighters saluted, a sharp military snap of the hand to the brow. Rowan rolled past them. She saw faces she recognized and faces she didn't. She saw the receptionist who had cowered under the desk. She saw the security guard she had scolded for smoking weeks ago. They all stood in the silent salute, a gesture of respect for the warrior who had walked through fire for them. Rowan Cale, the woman who had spent 3 years trying to disappear, trying to be a ghost, was finally seen. She wasn't seeing judgment. She wasn't seeing pity. She was seeing gratitude. Tears, hot and fast, spilled over her cheeks. She didn't wipe them away. She let them fall, washing away the soot of the fire and the dust of the desert that had clung to her soul for so long. At the end of the line, near the automatic doors, a small figure sat in a wheelchair of his own, waiting for his dialysis transport. It was Leo. He was holding a single large paper crane. It was purple, lavender, Arthur's color, Emily's color. Sterling stopped the wheelchair in front of the boy. "Hi, Rowan," Leo said, his voice small but bright. "I made this one for the man, the sad man." Rowan reached out and took the lavender crane. Her hands were shaking, but she held it like it was made of glass. "He would have loved it, Leo," Rowan choked out. "It's perfect." "Are you okay?" Leo asked, looking at her cast. Rowan looked up. She looked at the crane spinning above her, a galaxy of goodwill. She looked at Sterling, who nodded at her. She looked at the army of people standing guard behind her. The ghost was gone. "Yeah, Leo," Rowan smiled, and this time the smile reached her eyes, lighting them up like the dawn after a long, dark winter. I think I'm finally okay." Sterling released the brake on the chair. "Let's go home, Sergeant." Rowan clutched the purple crane to her chest as the doors slid open. The cold Chicago air hit her face, but it didn't bite anymore. It felt fresh. It felt like a new beginning. And that is the story of Rowan Cale. It serves as a powerful reminder that true strength isn't always loud, and heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear faded scrubs and comfortable shoes. We often judge others by their appearance, just as Dr. Sterling judged Rowan, never realizing that the person we overlook might be the very angel sent to save us. Rowan teaches us that while we cannot control the storms of life, we can choose to be the anchor for those who are afraid. It shows us that even the deepest scars can heal when we meet hatred with compassion and fear with faith. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button. It helps us find and share more powerful stories like this one. Please share this video with a friend or family member who needs a reminder of their own inner strength. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. May God bless you and keep you safe. May He grant you the courage of a warrior in your battles and the compassion of a healer in your quiet moments. If you believe that God places guardian angels in our lives exactly when we need them, please type Amen in the comments below.